is Thursday, and that means it's Caroline Heldman Day, professor of critical theory and social justice at Occidental College. She is here to break down the week's political headlines. Good morning, Caroline. Never a dull moment in Washington or the state of California.
Indeed. Good morning, Giselle. Wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you. Give us your perspective. I understand just moments ago we averted a government shutdown. House Democrats were able to get the votes. But the question is, as we head into the holidays with inflation, high, how close did we get?
Well, I don't think we got that close because Republicans and Democrats alike do not want the egg on their face that comes from closing down the federal government. And the problem with closing it down, even if you're morally or politically right about doing so or taking a stance, you still may get blamed for it. It's hard to predict how the public will respond. So I'm not at all surprised that they signed a continuing resolution to keep the government open through February.
Okay, that's good news. I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief, at least until that February date. All right, turning now to the Supreme Court. Whew. It looks like, based on the questions of the majority, that Roe versus Wade is in serious jeopardy. Where do we stand?
Well, folks who were watching Merrick Garland's appointment held up for political reasons back in 2016 called this, that the idea of holding up a Supreme Court seat in order to dangle it before evangelical voters to say, look, if you elect Trump, he's going to appoint some pro-life justices. That's exactly what has unfolded. And yes, Roe v. Wade is on the chopping block. So the question is whether it is fully repealed or whether or not it is partially repealed.
And that seems to lie in the hands of a more centrist Chief Justice Roberts. He seems to be concerned with the appearance of the court lurching too far to the right. And he's making this argument, Caroline, that the 15-week viability line has nothing to do with choice. What does he seem to be getting at here?
Well, Roberts is actually trying to hold the court together a bit, if you will. He needs one more conservative justice to go with him on this. He wants to, it looks like, based upon his questioning, that he wants to maintain abortion as a fundamental constitutional right for women, but place the line at viability and also allow states to draw an earlier line. So he is trying to prevent the court from overturning the 1973 Roe v. Wade precedent entirely by choosing this middle ground. But at the end of the day, it's still a gutting of Roe v. Wade. It would have the same effects on girls and women and others seeking abortions.
Chief Justice Sotomayor is suggesting the Supreme Court will not survive the stench. These are her words of the court overturning Roe v. Wade. And she seems to be implying that this is a blatant show of a partisan court. And is that what we're seeing here, Caroline? When you break a half century of precedent on the high court, does that signal a politicized court?
Well, Merrick Garland signaled a politicized court. The fact that you had political operatives like Mitch McConnell working in order to stack the court, that politicized it. And yes, we are looking at public opinion polls and seeing that the court, now with a 37% approval rating, has the lowest approval rating since we've been polling, and that's 100 years of polling, the lowest approval rating. And it has everything to do with politicizing it. And in this particular case, you have the court way out of step with public opinion, right? Nearly 60% of Americans want to maintain Roe v. Wade. So the question is, what happens in the midterm elections when the court guts or overturns Roe v. Wade and is wildly out of step with public opinion?
Historically, and you teach this, obviously, are you surprised where we're at today in the high court and on this issue particularly?
I am, because we've never seen the sort of political maneuvering in order to stack the high court. We simply haven't seen that. If you recall, to bring people back to 2016, Mitch McConnell made up a rule and said we cannot approve a Supreme Court appointee during the final year of a president's term. That was a made-up rule. He didn't have the legitimacy or authority to do that. And then fast forward to 2020, where Amy Coney Barrett's appointment is shoved through just weeks before an election. So a complete double standard. Yes, this is surprising. We've simply not seen this sort of partisan hackery being applied to the Supreme Court.
All right, let's turn now to the January 6th committee. Following Bannon's contempt of Congress charge, it appears Mark Meadows may be cooperating. He's leaked some of less favorable excerpts from his book about former President Trump, saying he had COVID before the debate and put people at risk. Are we seeing cracks in the armor here?
We definitely are. The question with Mark Meadows is whether or not he's actually going to be forthcoming. So he says he's cooperating with the committee. He has a lot of information as chief of staff, as someone who was putting pressure on state officials in the Department of Justice to overturn the election in 2020. He has a lot of information. He was there when the violent insurrection was happening. He was there with Trump. According to witnesses, they say that he was putting pressure on Ivanka Trump to try to talk some sense into her father during the violent insurrection. So really the question is, will Mark Meadows be forthcoming, or will he go into that committee and plead the fifth on much of their questioning and content?
The former president's efforts to keep his documents from the January 6th committee, where do you think we're at with that?
They don't look good for Trump. It does appear that the three-judge panel will likely rule against him and will require him to share documents. They haven't seemed inclined to accept the executive privilege argument because that only really applies to sitting presidents.
And Stacey Abrams, I'm going to go down my list because I want to get to a lot today. Stacey Abrams announcing she will run again for governor of Georgia. How groundbreaking could that be, and what do you think her chances are?
Well, I think her chances are good as long as she can overcome, the voter suppression that was likely present in the last election. It would be historic and significant because she would be the first Black woman governor, if you can believe that, in all 50 states.
And Caroline, more chaos coming out of the vice president's office. There's another person, Simone Sanders, her chief of staff, resigning. What do you make of all this? Not looking good.
Well, I'm looking at this and seeing a very positive or silver lining in that I think that Vice President Kamala Harris has been underprepared for a lot of her media events, whether it was a trip to the border, the NBC interview, allowing a woman into the press room who wasn't actually a reporter, who asked questions that were unbecoming. I mean, there are a lot of faux pas happening in the comms department, in the Vice President's office. So I think it's actually good that there is turnover in those positions.
Caroline Heldman, as always, you give us perspective and a lens on life and politics. It just puts an ease in the soul. Thank you so very much. When it's Thursday, it's Caroline Heldman Day. All right, everyone, this is your morning on Spectrum News 1. We will be right back. You are looking at a very hazy, beautiful shoreline in Southern California. The sun is there. It's shining. Just wait for it. Topanga Beach. We'll be right back.